Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I was approaching 35 and I'd learned plenty of lessons in my 8 years of legal practice. One of the most valuable lessons came from Sarah Chen, a senior partner I worked for during my summer internship after my second year of law school. Listen carefully, she told me one afternoon while we were reviewing case files. A lawyer has 3 duties: first to themselves, second to the court, and last to the client. Always make sure you come first and the client comes last. Why put the client last? I asked. She leaned back in her chair and gave me a knowing look. Because clients will screw you over. They'll throw you under the bus without a second thought. I should have stayed with Sarah's firm, but being young and ambitious, I had to chase that downtown dream. Now I'm still downtown, but thankfully I remembered her wisdom when a client tried to do exactly what she'd warned about. My client was a mid-sized property management company, not publicly traded, but they had a decent portfolio of commercial buildings across the city. In early 2023, one of their properties, a warehouse complex, burned down completely. The company needed to collect on the insurance, so they assigned Thomas, their aging operations manager, to handle it. Thomas, pushing 65 and set in his ways, thought he was too experienced to need legal help. I've been handling insurance claims for 30 years, he'd tell me whenever I called. Save your fancy legal fees for someone else. He was one of those people who took pride in avoiding lawyer costs. Every time I dealt with Thomas, he'd argue about billable hours and try to negotiate rates that were already competitive. One day, during a particularly frustrating phone call, I tried again. "Thomas, the insurance company is playing you." "How would you know?" he scoffed. "I haven't even involved you in this." "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "I only found out about this $1 million claim by accident when you mentioned it last month. I had to practically beg you to let me review the proof of loss form." "The form is fine," he snapped. "I don't need a babysitter." "Look, Thomas, I've seen this pattern before. They're dragging this out deliberately. They have no intention of paying." "You don't understand," he said. "Mark, the adjuster, is a straight shooter. We play golf together." "The limitation period expires in 2 weeks," I warned. "After that, you can't sue. They'll ghost you faster than a bad Tinder date." "Whatever you say," he muttered and hung up. I immediately sent him an email documenting our conversation and my recommendations. Then another, and another. My final message was crystal clear. "I'll be in court for the next 2 weeks. You need to file suit now. Use any firm from your approved list, but file that claim." Radio silence. 2 months passed. No word from Thomas. I was starting to think maybe he'd actually pulled it off when my phone lit up with his name. "Remember that warehouse fire claim we discussed?" "Oh yeah," I said. "Glad they finally paid out. You must be relieved." There was a long pause. "Where's the lawsuit paperwork?" "What lawsuit paperwork?" "The one you filed. You know, when I told you to sue them." I felt a headache coming on. "Thomas, are you telling me they didn't pay?" He hung up. Minutes later, I got his email claiming he'd instructed me to file suit. I replied, copying his CEO, CFO, and Rachel, their general counsel. Rachel called me within the hour. "Thomas really stepped in it, didn't he? His story didn't fly?" "Not even close. The email trail killed his version of events." She sighed. "So we're out $2 million? "Actually," I said, "I filed a basic claim to preserve the cause of action. I knew Thomas was going to botch this." "You filed without authorization?" Her voice went up an octave. "That's a huge risk." "It was that or watch your company lose millions," I said, sending her the claim documents. "You're a lifesaver," she breathed. "Handle this for us?" A week later, I got a call from their new operations manager. Thomas had been escorted out by security, cardboard box in hand. Sure, it wasn't the outcome I'd wanted for him, but he'd tried to blame me for his mistake. His replacement, Jessica, turned out to be fantastic. Professional, efficient, and she never questioned our invoices. Sometimes I share this story with junior associates over drinks. Not because I'm proud of how it ended for Thomas, but because it perfectly illustrates Sarah's lesson about client loyalty. Or rather, the lack of it. The next one is an entitled people's story. I inherited 50 acres of desert land in Arizona from my grandfather back in 2019. The property had been in our family for 3 generations, and while it wasn't prime real estate by any means, it held sentimental value. My grandfather used to take me camping there when I was a kid, teaching me about desert survival and telling stories around the campfire. The land was located about 30 minutes outside Phoenix, bordering a fairly upscale planned community called Desert Palms Estates. I hadn't visited the property much since inheriting it, mainly because I lived in Colorado and was busy running my software consulting business. I paid the property taxes and had a local property management company do basic maintenance and security checks every few months. Everything was fine until March 2023 when I received a bizarre call from my property manager, Tom. "Hey, Mark, we've got a situation here," Tom said, his voice tense. "Someone's building a house on your land." I nearly dropped my coffee. "What do you mean, building a house?" "I mean a full-on mansion. We're talking at least 6,000 square feet. They've already laid the foundation and started framing. How did you not know about this?" "I didn't authorize any construction," I said, my mind racing. "How long has this been going on?" "Construction started about 3 weeks ago. I assumed you'd sold part of the property or given permission. It's right along the border with Desert Palms Estates." I immediately booked a flight to Phoenix. When I arrived the next day, Tom picked me up from the airport and drove me to the property. What I saw made my blood boil. There was indeed a massive house under construction, sitting squarely on my land about 100 feet from the Desert Palms Estates boundary. Construction crews were actively working on the site. I marched over to what appeared to be the foreman. "Who authorized this construction?" He looked confused. "The owner, Karen Davidson. She's got all the permits." "Are you with the homeowner association?" "No, I'm Mark Thompson. I own this land. No one got my permission to build here." The foreman's face went pale. He immediately got on his phone, and within 15 minutes, a white Range Rover came speeding up to the site. Out stepped a woman in her 50s wearing designer clothes and oversized sunglasses. "I'm Karen Davidson," she announced imperiously. "What seems to be the problem here?" "The problem is you're building on my land without permission," I said. "This needs to stop immediately." She laughed dismissively. "Don't be ridiculous. I purchased this lot from Desert Palms Estates. I have all the paperwork." "This isn't part of Desert Palms Estates. This is my private property. I can show you the deed and property records right now." Karen's face hardened. "Listen here. I'm on the Homeowner Association board at Desert Palms. We voted to expand the development into this area. This is my lot now." "That's not how property rights work," I explained, trying to stay calm. "You can't just vote to take someone else's land. You need to stop construction immediately and restore the property to its original condition." "I will do no such thing," she snapped. "I've already spent over $400,000 on this project. My husband is a very prominent attorney. If you try to interfere, we'll bury you in legal fees." I pulled out my phone and called the county sheriff's office to report the trespassing. While waiting for them to arrive, I documented everything with photos and video. Karen stood there berating me the entire time, claiming I was harassing her and threatening to sue me for emotional distress. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, Karen immediately tried to paint herself as the victim. However, once I showed him my property deed and records clearly showing the boundary lines, he agreed this was a civil matter that needed to be resolved through legal channels. He advised Karen to halt construction until ownership could be definitively established. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Karen shrieked. "Do you know who my husband is? He's a partner at Davidson, Miller & Associates. We're not stopping anything." The deputy shrugged. "Ma'am, that's your choice, but continuing construction would be at your own risk." I immediately contacted a real estate attorney recommended by a friend. After reviewing all the documentation, he confirmed I had an extremely strong case and filed for an emergency injunction to stop construction. We also filed a civil suit against Karen, her husband's law firm, which had handled the permitting, and Desert Palms Estates Homeowner Association for trespassing, property damage, and illegal construction. Karen and her husband fought the injunction aggressively, but the judge granted it within a week. Construction was forced to stop. During the hearing, it came to light that Karen had deliberately misrepresented the property boundaries when applying for permits, submitting doctored surveys that made it appear her lot extended onto my land. She had assumed that since the land was undeveloped, no one would notice or care. "Your Honor, this is clearly just a misunderstanding," Karen's husband argued smoothly. "We believe this land was part of the Homeowner Association's planned expansion. We're willing to purchase the property from Mr. Thompson at market value to resolve this amicably." My attorney countered, "This was no misunderstanding. We have evidence Mrs. Davidson submitted falsified documents to obtain permits. She was informed multiple times this was private property but chose to proceed anyway. My client is not interested in selling." The judge agreed with us and maintained the injunction. Karen was furious. Over the next few months, she tried everything to pressure me into selling. She had her homeowner association friends file countless complaints about my unmaintained property. She spread rumors in the community that I was trying to block neighborhood improvement. She even had her husband's firm send threatening letters about counter-suing for various made-up violations. I stood firm. The case proceeded to trial in January 2024. By this point, Karen had sunk nearly $800,000 into the partially completed house. During discovery, we uncovered emails proving she knew exactly what she was doing. She had written to other homeowner association board members. That empty land is an eyesore. The owner lives out of state and never uses it. If we start building, he'll probably just take a check to go away. The trial lasted 4 days. Karen's testimony was a disaster. She repeatedly contradicted herself and came across as entitled and dishonest. When asked why she didn't simply approach me about buying the land legally, she said, "Why should I have to beg some absentee owner for permission? That land was just sitting there being wasted. We're improving the whole area's property values." The jury was not impressed. They ruled entirely in my favor, ordering Karen to remove all construction and restore the land to its original condition, pay $250,000 in compensatory damages, pay $500,000 in punitive damages due to the intentional and malicious nature of her actions. Karen had a complete meltdown in the courtroom. "This is insanity. You can't make me tear down my dream home. Don't you know who we are in this community?" The judge was unmoved. "Mrs. Davidson, your position in the community does not put you above the law. You knowingly trespassed and built on someone else's property with false documents. The jury's decision stands." Karen and her husband tried to appeal, but their case was rejected. They then offered me $2 million to purchase the property and let them keep the house. I declined. This had never been about money. It was about principle and preserving my grandfather's legacy. The house demolition began in March 2024. I made sure to be there the day it started. Karen showed up to make a scene, screaming about how I was destroying her life and threatening more legal action. Several news crews were present as the story had gained significant local media attention. "How does it feel to be so vindictive?" Karen shouted at me. "We could have worked something out. Now you're just destroying a perfectly good house out of spite." I calmly replied, "This could have all been avoided if you'd simply asked permission and followed the law like everyone else. Your sense of entitlement doesn't override my property rights." The demolition took several days. Karen and her husband were ultimately forced to pay all the removal costs on top of the damages. Desert Palms Estates Homeowner Association distanced themselves from the whole situation, and Karen was asked to resign from the board due to the negative publicity. Her husband's law firm also faced an ethics investigation for their role in submitting falsified documents. The final cost to Karen and her husband ended up being over $2.5 million between construction, demolition, damages, and legal fees. They had to sell their primary residence in Desert Palms Estates to cover everything. Last I heard, they moved to California to start fresh. As for me, I decided to donate 10 acres of the land to a desert wildlife conservation group in my grandfather's memory. They're creating an educational center to teach local kids about desert ecology, something I know would have made him proud. The rest of the property remains undeveloped, just as it has been for generations. The whole experience taught me a valuable lesson about standing up to entitled people who think rules don't apply to them. Karen assumed that because she had money and connections, she could simply take what she wanted. Instead, her arrogance cost her everything she had worked for. I still get occasional angry messages from Karen's friends in the homeowner association claiming I ruined her life, but I sleep just fine knowing I protected my grandfather's legacy and showed that justice can prevail even against wealthy bullies. The desert land remains in my family, and now it will help educate future generations about respecting both nature and property rights. To give you an idea of just how delusional Karen remains about the whole situation, she actually tried to contact me through my attorney last month. She wanted to clear the air and suggested we go into business together developing the property. I had my attorney send back a one-line response: "The property is not for sale or development. Please do not contact us again." Some people never learn, but at least in this case, karma came through in the end. The entitled homeowner association, Karen, who thought she could steal my land, ended up losing her home, her reputation, and her money. Sometimes justice takes time, but it's worth fighting for what's right. As a final note, I did install security cameras and no trespassing signs around the property perimeter. I've noticed several expensive cars slowly driving by, probably other homeowner association members eyeing the land. But I think Karen's expensive lesson has discouraged anyone else from trying similar stunts. That desert land will stay in my family for generations to come, just as my grandfather intended. Update. It's been 6 months since my last post, and I thought I should update everyone on what happened. Just when I thought the Karen situation was finally over, things took another wild turn. In May 2024, Karen's husband's law firm dissolved after the ethics investigation revealed widespread issues with falsified documents. Apparently, our case had prompted several other clients to come forward with similar complaints. The State Bar Association suspended his license for 2 years. This seemed to push Karen over the edge. One morning in June, I received an urgent call from Tom, my property manager. "Mark, you need to get down here right away. Karen's back and she's got bulldozers." I immediately called the sheriff while booking the next flight to Phoenix. When I arrived, I found Karen had hired a construction company to start clearing my land, claiming she had legal authority through Desert Palms Estates Homeowner Association. The sheriff's deputies were already there when I pulled up. Karen was screaming at them, waving a stack of papers. "This is homeowner association property now. We voted on it last week. Show them the documents, Jerry," she yelled at her husband, who looked completely defeated. The documents were obviously fake. Poorly edited copies of homeowner association bylaws with my property addresses inserted. The construction company immediately pulled their equipment out when they realized what was happening. "Mrs. Davidson, this is criminal trespassing," the deputy warned. "Leave now or you're going to jail." "You can't arrest me, I own this community," Karen shrieked. She then tried to run toward one of the bulldozers. 2 deputies had to physically restrain her. They arrested her for trespassing, criminal damage, and resisting arrest. My attorney immediately filed for a permanent restraining order. During the hearing, we learned Karen had been harassing other property owners in the area, trying to convince them to join her in a class action against me for devaluing the neighborhood. The judge granted the restraining order and warned Karen that any further violations would result in jail time. She also ordered Karen to undergo a psychological evaluation. But the real justice came through the Desert Palms Estates Homeowner Association itself. They called an emergency meeting and voted to permanently ban Karen and her husband from the community. Their remaining investment property in Desert Palms was forced into sale under homeowner association bylaws. During this meeting, several board members apologized to me personally. They revealed Karen had been terrorizing residents for years with frivolous fines and threats. No one had stood up to her because of her husband's legal connections. "You did what we were all afraid to do," one board member told me. "She's been driving good people out of this community for a decade." The homeowner association also voted to create a formal buffer zone between their development and my property, including a written agreement that they would never attempt to expand onto my land. Karen and her husband ended up moving to Florida, where he's working as a real estate agent. I heard through local friends that she tried to join another homeowner association board there, but was rejected when her history came up in a background check. As for my property, something good came from all this drama. The Wildlife Education Center opened last month, and they're already hosting school groups. We built a memorial garden dedicated to my grandfather, with plaques teaching visitors about desert conservation. The center's success led to an unexpected opportunity. The Arizona State Parks Department approached me about incorporating part of my land into a new desert preservation project. They offered to purchase 20 acres at well above market value, with guarantees it would remain undeveloped and open to the public. After careful consideration, I agreed to sell those 20 acres. The money will fund a scholarship program at the Education Center, providing free desert ecology programs for underprivileged kids. I kept the remaining 20 acres, including my grandfather's favorite camping spot. Last week, I received a letter from Karen's adult daughter apologizing for her mother's behavior and sharing some context. Apparently, Karen had grown up poor and became obsessed with projecting wealth and power after marrying into money. The daughter wrote that losing their status in the community had actually led Karen to start therapy. While I appreciate the apology, I'm keeping the restraining order in place. Some people only learn boundaries when they're legally enforced. The whole experience taught me more than just standing up to bullies. It showed me how one person's sense of entitlement can poison an entire community, and how important it is to take a stand, not just for yourself, but for everyone affected. My grandfather used to say that desert land shows you who people really are. In the desert, you can't fake it. You either respect the land and its boundaries, or you face the consequences. Karen learned that lesson the hard way. I'm still running my software business from Colorado, but I visit the property more often now. The education center staff sends me weekly updates about their programs, and it's amazing to see kids discovering the desert's beauty just like I did with my grandfather. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about making someone pay. It's about taking their negative actions and turning them into something positive for the community. Karen tried to steal my land for her mansion, but instead it's becoming a place where future generations will learn to respect and protect the desert. That's a legacy my grandfather would be proud of. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened over 6 years ago, so I'm a little fuzzy on all of the details, but it is one of my proudest moments. I am 8 years older than my sister, and although we didn't live in the same town anymore by the time she graduated high school, I was so excited for her to attend university because she applied for the same program as I did, and knowing her, she was gonna freaking kill it in a way I never could. I am shy, awkward, and overall non-confrontational. She is fierce, charming, and never backs down from a fight. Our brother in the middle is a perfect mix between these traits. When she told me she was traveling down south for a conference related to a potential major, I believe, I was really excited for her. This conference also had a career fair, and it was going to be the first one she'd attended. I gave her some advice about how to present herself. She had her resumes and some companies in mind, and I knew she was going to do great. Cue to the day after, and I get a call from her in distress. So she wasn't sure how a certain networking interaction went and wanted to ask me what I thought. There was a man from a certain company who took great interest in her resume. A freshman, not unheard of, but at this point she had very little experience. So he pulled her aside and wanted to talk to her further. He asked her which hotel she was staying at. She got nervous, and said he should take her to dinner that evening. At the same time, this man, who she said looked older than our dad, reached out and stroked a strand of her hair. At this point, she started crying, and I saw red. I asked her for this man's name and the company he worked for and told her to avoid that table company at all costs. I told her she did nothing wrong and he was being extremely inappropriate. I told her to keep a buddy with her while she was still down there and it was all right. She told me she was scared about talking to other companies in the future. How does she know if they really want her as an employee, or if someone is going to be creepy? Also, as this man had her resume, apparently he'd texted that he was in front of her hotel and she avoided responding because she was scared. Because of this, she was scared to hand out her resume. I didn't think it was possible for me to be more enraged than I already was. She was 18. First career fair. Already she was terrified of career fairs because of this sleazy old fart. Hell no. Not my freaking sister. The world will not take her shine. I told her that I would take care of it and hung up. I immediately told my boss that I'd need to take the first half of the day for a personal matter. First, I looked up this man's LinkedIn so I could put a face to the rage and disgust I felt. Then I contacted my own company's HR and asked what the procedure would be if an employee of ours engaged in behavior like this while on company time. She had wonderful advice and urged me to contact this man's company's HR department as well. So I did. I left a detailed email with the what had happened, their employee's name and the location of the conference and career fair where he'd been representing their company. I left my name and number as well in case they wanted to know any more details, and I recall getting a call from their HR department soon afterward telling me they were taking this seriously and were going to investigate. The woman sounded very sympathetic. She told me that this man was someone that had been with the company for a while and had actually retired, so now he was mainly focused on recruitment for the company, somewhat on a consultant level. I want to say by early afternoon, I received an email that this man had been let go from the company completely, and they thanked me for my report. The speed at which this all happened lends me to believe this was not the first time, either that or his behavior was such a liability, sending a creep to recruitment, that it was easy to just let him go. Let me tell you, that was the most fulfilling cackle I had ever cackled in all my days. I called my sister up and told her the news, and she was amazed. She thanked me, and we talked a little more about what to look out for when networking. That being pulled aside generally is a good thing, but it sucks that this person took advantage of that. I told her not to take this horrible experience as normal because it was not, and emphasized she did nothing wrong. The good news is 6 years later, she has her bachelor's and master's degree and has a stacked lineup of intern co-op experience, think mix of startups and big-name industries, and is currently rocking her career at a meaningful startup in her field. I am still shy, awkward, and relatively non-confrontational, but if you come for my siblings, I go for blood. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.